Hey, it's Brandon with P&W CDL training. We are on part 2 and we're inspecting a school bus as well as a passenger bus, and we're looking to help people study for the pre-trip. This bus, if you notice, does not have the amber and red lights for unloading and loading or the actual stop paddles, so we're without that. But at this point, you're going to actually step outside the bus and you're going to check underneath it, make sure it's not leaning or unlevel. That would indicate suspension problems as well as tire inflation problems. And you can look all the way underneath the whole bus and check to make sure there's no fluids actually leaking underneath the bus in the front and also in the rear engine compartment. No oil, grease, coolants, or puddles underneath there. Then we'll actually step up to the top of the bus, and we're going to start with the clearance lights up top. Okay, those are clean, not missing, not broken, not cracked or damaged, and they are the proper color amber. We're going to work our way down to our turn signals. Okay, and four-way flasher lenses, they're clean, not missing, not broken, not cracked or damaged. And they are the proper color amber. Our headlight lenses, both high beam and low beam, are all in the same one. They're clean, not missing, not broken. You don't have to mention proper color on there if you choose not to. While we're here, we're going to check our mirror brackets, and our mirror brackets are all properly secured, not bent, cracked, or broken, with no loose or missing nuts or bolts or fittings. Okay. And we're going to work on the side of our bus. And we're going to start with our clearance lights up on the top of the bus and the front and the middle. Those are both amber in color, clean, not missing, not broken, not cracked or damaged. And so, like I said, they're the proper color for the location. We have a rear clearance light over there, and that is red. It needs to be clean, not missing, not broken, proper color red. We have our indicator lights on the side of our bus, right here in the front and right there towards the rear. Clean, not missing, not broken, proper color amber. Our reflectors are all clean, not missing, not broken, proper color amber. And we have a DOT reflective tape in the areas it needs to be. It's all clean and securely affixed. Walk down the side of the bus and mention any rear reflectors that we may have missed. The red in color, clean, not missing, not broken, proper color red. And we'll go to the rear of the bus, and the DOT tape in the rear of the bus is all clean and securely affixed. Our clearance lights up on top are all clean, not missing, not broken, proper color red, as well as our tail lights and turn signals. Clean, not missing, not broken, proper color red. You don't have to mention reverse lights, turn signals and amber lights, clean, not missing, not broken, proper color red, as well as our reflectors. On this side of the bus, we inspect that the same way as we did the other side. That covers all the lights, lenses, and reflectors and reflective tape. Now we're going to go underneath the engine compartment. If your bus that you're inspecting does not have access to the engine compartment, it's okay to point at the panels where those parts belong and actually describe them and name them. Okay, so underneath our engine compartment, we like to start with our exhaust. Our exhaust is back here. You're going to point to the items. We can't be vague. Our exhaust is all properly secured, no loose or missing nuts or bolts, clamps. Okay. There's no cracks, holes, dents, rust, or soot that would indicate a leak on our exhaust. All right, so we check that out. Obviously, for good reason, we don't want to poison people. Leaks cause problems with exhaust, carbon monoxide. All right, now we got our coolant reservoir. We're going to start with that next. Our coolant reservoir is all properly secured with no loose or missing nuts or bolts. There's no cracks, breaks, or damage, and the reservoir is not leaking. You're going to describe how you would check the fluid depending on what your reservoir is. This one has a sight glass, and you're going to make sure it's at or above the fill line. If it did not have a sight glass, you would tell the examiner, we'd open the cap, but it's hot. Okay. We don't need to open the cap in that situation. And then we're going to work our way over to the alternator. Okay, our alternator is properly secured, no loose or missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked or broken or damaged. You're going to look at the nuts and the bolts and the parts where it mounts, and that's why it's securely mounted, because it has no loose or missing nuts or bolts and it's not cracked or broken or damaged. Our electrical connections on our alternator are all tight. They're not rubbing or touching. They're not burnt, exposed, cracked, or broken on our connections. And our alternator is also belt driven with no more than 1/2 to 3/4 of play at the center of the belt. There's no loose fibers, no cracks in the belt, no damage, and all of our belts are snug. In this case, it's all one belt. It's snug. Gotta mention snug. And we can go to our water pump. At this point to the water pump, follow the bottom hose out of the radiator, and you'll find the water pump. Securely mounted, no loose or missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked or broken or damaged or leaking. In this case, this water pump's belt driven. Okay, we already inspected the belts. It's not leaking, it's working properly. And now we will move to the oil dipstick. This is where we check our oil level. We'd pull it out and explain that checking the oil level consists of making sure that the oil level is above the fill line. You would need to tell him you would do that. You don't have to do it. Here's our power steering reservoir. Right here, it also is a hydraulic reservoir. You would make sure it's securely mounted with no loose or missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked or broken or damaged or leaking. And you would tell him you would check the level by using the sight glass, or you would open the cap. Okay. Our fittings and off of our reservoirs are all tight and not leaking, and our hoses have no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. They're not rubbing or touching or leaking as well. Next, we're going to move down to our air compressor. You can't see it, but you can point down in there. You can see the air governor, however, and that helps you to follow that line. But typically you're going to look for steel braided lines and hoses back there. And our air compressor is gear driven. It's properly mounted with no loose or missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked, broken, damaged, or leaking. Our air compressor is working properly. Mention working properly after those components. It's important. Then we can look around and check everything else and make sure that we didn't miss anything. The radiator, while it needs to be securely mounted, not cracked or broken or damaged or leaking, it's not currently on our test. Any other hoses, lines, and fittings and clamps, just mention you would inspect those the same way. All right, at this point we're going to go ahead and shut our engine compartment, and we are going to start at the front of the bus. The reason why is because we need to do like item inspections, and we're going to do our brakes and our suspension and all those things as well. And it's easier to turn the front wheels on the bus so you can see those parts. So we're going to start at the front of the bus. We're going to start with our steering linkage, which is behind this panel right here. Our steering linkage needs to be properly secured with no loose or missing nuts or bolts, cotter pins, castle nuts, keys. Okay, we cannot have any cracks, broken, bent, connecting arms and rods and links. All the joints and the rods and the sockets that actually connect together need to be properly greased and not excessively worn. That consists of all the steering linkage. Then we have our steering box, which is secured properly, securely mounted. No loose or missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked or broken or damaged or leaking. It's working properly. Steering is obviously very important. Okay, now we're going to walk around to the passenger side of the bus, and we are going to talk about the door from the outside, opening and closing freely, no hinges damaged, not cracked or broken, and the seal's intact. All right. This is our fuel lid right here. This is where we'll fuel up. Our cap needs to be tight and not leaking. Our fuel tank is down there. It needs to be properly secured. No loose or missing nuts or bolts or straps. No cracks, no holes, no dents, no leaks in our fuel tank. Then we can work our way from the inside out. First, we're going to start with our suspension. Since we can see down there, we're actually going to point to our mount hangers. Those are our spring mounts. Those hang the leaf springs. They're not cracked, no loose or missing nuts or bolts, no damage. Okay, they're all properly secured to the frame. Our bushings, where our leaf springs actually connect, are not missing or excessively worn. And our leaf springs have no cracks, they're not shifted, they're not missing. Our U-bolts are all tight, not cracked or broken or damaged or missing. Our shock absorbers are both secure on the top and the bottom with no loose or missing nuts or bolts, and they're not damaged or leaking. And then you'll look around and you've covered all your suspension at this point. Now you're going to cover your brakes. So the brakes, you turn the wheel as much as you can and you can see some of the parts in some cases. The hoses, lines, and fittings are the first part of our brake. And our hoses, our fittings are all tight and not leaking. And our hoses have no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. There are no bulges in them. They're not rubbing or touching on anything. The hoses themselves are not leaking, which means they're properly supplying air to our air chamber. Okay, our air chamber is securely mounted with no loose or missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked, broken, damaged, no dents, no leaks in our chamber. Our clamp that's on the air chamber is tight. We can get pictures of these things, or we can use one of the big trucks to actually check this stuff out. If you follow me right down here, we can actually take a look at an air chamber and clamp right down there. Okay, that's what we're looking at. All right. So our slack adjuster and push rod is our next section. It's properly secured, no loose or missing nuts or bolts, cotter pins, or keys. There's no cracks, bends, breaks, or damage to our slack adjuster and our push rod assembly. And with the brakes released, keep in mind the parking brake does not set this brake. You should not be able to pull on that slack adjuster and push rod assembly and have it travel more than 1 inch. Then we have our inner and outer steer tire. No abrasions, bulges, or cuts or damages. Our steer tire needs to have at least 4 30-seconds of tread, right? No recaps, no tread separation, and all of our tread is evenly worn. Then we get to our rim and our bead flange. Securely mounted, secured, not cracked or broken, damaged, no illegal welds. Okay, it's free of all damages. And we can go to our lug nuts. They're all tight. None of these lug nuts are missing. There's no rust trails or shiny threads, and there's no cracks or distortion between the lug nuts. Our hub seal is right here. We would check the level with a sight glass or with pulling off the cover and make sure it's full and not leaking. This is our valve stem and cap right here. The cap's present, it's not missing. There's no damage to the valve stem. It's not leaking. And you would use a tire pressure gauge to check the air pressure. Once again, that's what you'd explain. You don't actually